Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree is part of the Public Square Media network of podcasts that seek to bring an LDS perspective into the public square. I'm your host, Liz Busby. I teach writing at BYU and study the intersection of religion and science fiction and fantasy, and I'm a Latter-day Saint. And with me today is my co-host, Carl.
Hey everyone, my name is Carl Cranny. I have a PhD in religion, and I've written on the intersection of religious themes in pop culture, and I'm also a member of the church.
And we have with us multiple-time guest on the show, Meagan. Introduce yourself.
I'm Meagan Kohler. I relentlessly try to insert myself into this podcast, and I am a writer at Deseret News, where I write on the intersection of faith and culture.
And we are totally okay with having Meagan insert herself into this podcast. It's fantastic. Today, we are going to be talking about The Angel, which is a short horror film by friend of the podcast, Barrett and Jessica Burgin, about two polygamous wives who receive an unexpected messenger. And you can watch this 20-minute film for free on YouTube, and we recommend that you do that before listening to this podcast because we're absolutely going to be spoiling the ending, and you need to go in blind to this film.
Go watch it right now.
Yes, go watch it right now, please.
Unless you're driving.
It's 18 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's real short, you guys, and it's amazing.
Okay, so for this episode, we're going to be doing a short conversation between the three of us reacting to the movie, and then we're going to be bringing on Barrett and Jess to talk to them about the making of this film and their vision for future films. But first, we're going to do our quick best book segment, where we each recommend one thing we are watching, reading, or listening to. My recommendation today is actually a book that I changed my mind about. I did not like this book the first time I read it, and I kept encountering people who loved it. And so I picked it up and tried it again, and I actually enjoyed it. And this book is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. And my complaint about the book is that the protagonist is very passive and inactive. So it's about a half-goblin, half-elf child of the elf emperor, and there is an accident, and he becomes the last surviving heir and the emperor of this elf kingdom that hates him and is racist against him. And a lot of the book is him reacting to assassination plots and political machinations, which bothered me the first time I read it. I was like, this protagonist isn't pro-tagging. But in this time reading it, I realized that the point of the book is more about his internal struggle with how do you treat the people who treated you badly when the roles are reversed. And in that way, this book is really refreshing because the main character, Maya, chooses almost always the path of forgiveness and understanding, even for things that are almost unforgivable. And it's a very moral and uplifting book when read in that way, and very different from what you read in a lot of fantasy novels, but even most literature nowadays, where it feels very much, I'll show you. Maya is very much not, I'll show you. It's, how can I be a good person regardless of the way they've treated me? And that is just fantastic. So that's The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison.
Well, I'm happy to report that sounded interesting enough to me that I went to Goodreads to put it on my to-read list, and it's already on my to-read list. So there you go.
I pulled it up too, so I'm excited.
There will be links to all this on our website, of course.
Carl, what have you been up to?
Kind of in part of our conversation from our last episode about living in Nazi Germany as a Latter-day Saint and how do you navigate the various waters you live in. And I had just read The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark a couple months ago. And that informed sort of the way I approached that movie. But I wanted to get into some more books that hit the same theme. And I read The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark, The Triumph of Christianity by Bart Ehrman, and I'm almost done with Dominion by Tom Holland, all three of which sort of cover the same sort of thing. Like, how did this very small and very weird, as far as the ethics of the day, religion end up taking over the world, basically? Dominion is making the argument that many, many things in our world today are actually from Christianity, whether or not we recognize that as its original cultural influence. I think he could have made the argument a little more clear in a lot of places, and it's actually my least favorite of the three for that reason. Listen to some of the podcasts with the author, Tom Holland. He does a better job in the podcast of explaining his thesis than I think the book does so far. But all three of those are just really interesting, talking, I think, about how the meek will actually inherit the earth, and there are good sociological and demographic reasons for thinking so. Survival of the fittest does not actually work in some important ways, and we should stop applying it to sociology. Anyway, so those have all been quite fun to read, and that's a project that I've been on for the past little while.
Very interesting. I got to pick up one of those because that's good background to have. Meagan, what have you been up to lately? What have you been reading?
I just finished Remarkably Bright Creatures because Netflix was doing an adaptation. I had a lot of hesitations about reading a book that seemed to be narrated by an octopus. It's actually mostly not narrated by an octopus. That just becomes a cute quirk in the book that doesn't take center stage. But I thought it was really good. Definitely worth watching or reading. The Netflix adaptation I thought was also really good, but I think it has a different focus than the book. And I like that. I actually liked that in this case. I think some books are served really well by really faithful adaptations and other ones aren't. This one, the way that Netflix drilled down on a few specific things made for a better adaptation.
Oh, interesting. I'm excited because I read that one for book club, and so I'm excited to see the movie version. It's kind of fun.
Did you like it?
I liked it. I wish there was more octopus, but that's the sci-fi fantasy nerd in me. I was
Yeah.
like, more octopus. I want Children of Ruin all the way. But yeah, I'm excited to see the movie. Okay, we will have links to all these recommendations on our website, popcultureapricottree.com. And buying through those links helps support our podcast so we can keep bringing you conversations about the true and beautiful in pop culture. And now we're on to our main discussion about The Angel.
Go watch it right now if you haven't watched it. I'm serious, you guys.
And with that warning, here we go. I saw this one at about a year ago at the Mormon History Association conference. They had a little booth and they were screening it for people. And it was really interesting to watch it there. But Meagan, you reached out to us after seeing it on YouTube and said, I want to be on a podcast about this. So talk to me about your reaction to this film.
So it was, I think my first reaction was excitement because I think it is something that is very different as far as what we've encountered so far in Latter-day Saint cinema, maybe at least since Richard Dutcher. I don't know, this is going to sound maybe a little snobbish, but when I was in school, I was taking philosophy of art classes, and I even took two classes that were specifically on film. And I left after engaging with cinema from other traditions that have strong religious backgrounds, especially like Islamic directors. I felt so disappointed in our showing for that because I had experienced something so transcendent in some of these other films that I didn't even have to be a part of their tradition to experience. And I just felt like there was a lot of insider baseball type stuff with Latter-day Saint cinema. And so this is definitely not a film that I would call transcendent, and it's not aiming to be, but it's not insider baseball. It is definitely something that can engage people from a wide variety of backgrounds while capitalizing on some kind of weird Latter-day Saint history, but it's not a historical film, but incorporating elements of our history in it. So I think that's pretty ambitious, and I think it did it well.
I have to completely agree with you on the dearth of good Latter-day Saint cinema since Richard Dutcher. God's Army 2 is, for my money, one of my favorite movies of all time. Seriously, it to be able to take some of the things from our tradition and use them to tell universal stories is something that Richard Dutcher did that very few people have reached the cinematic heights he has trying to use our tradition. And so I agree with you on that one. And this one certainly is able to do that same thing, but then transpose it into the horror genre and make some really interesting points along the way for such a short 18-minute movie.
Yeah.
It hits a lot of notes very quickly, and it's very meaty, it's very weighty, and I love that.
I think that's a great point, that this film is also very, very deep if you know the culture, right? There's a lot of references that aren't explained, but rewatching it are like, oh, that hurt. But it's in a different way than something like The Single Sword, right? Where it's, we're just alluding to pop culture for fun and Mormon folklore stuff. This is the Angel really takes our symbolic and historical references seriously and uses them to make something instead of just, look, you see yourself on the screen. Isn't that great?
Yes, I like that. And I think I would compare it almost to the Latter-day Saint inferences being like the bonus content. It isn't necessary to understand that, to enjoy the film and to relate to the main part of the story. By being so niche in the sense of this is 19th century Southern Utah polygamy, that is, in a lot of ways, I think that is a boon to the viewer, because I think it's something... the remoteness of everything that's going on in the film, like this way in which you have a hard time really relating to anybody, actually adds to the horror of it. It just removes you. You almost feel like you're floating because there's just nothing you can really grasp that is familiar to you, even as a Latter-day Saint, right? So I think that is unique, and that there are definitely those references that if you understand them, they are going to unlock that really cool bonus content. But it's like when we talked about Wake Up Dead Man, you don't have to understand Catholic theology to get a lot out of that film.
For sure. But it does do really interesting things with polygamy that I think it does in ways that haven't been done by LDS film, but also haven't been done by anti-Mormon cinema either, right?
Yes.
Like the earliest appearances of Latter-day Saints in cinema is in these polygamy horror films where the women are being stolen and the Danites are coming after you and we're the villains, we're the bad guys.
Yeah.
And polygamy is the scary thing. And in a church film, if you're going to address polygamy at all, we're not dealing so much with the day-to-day, how do you live in this? We're dealing with I'm going to ask you to do this, and it's a test of faith, and that's as far as we go.
Yes.
When we covered it all, because mostly we're too scared to really cover what that would be like. And that's what I find really interesting about this film, is that it manages to do both things. You have these first few minutes of the film where there's no dialogue, and it's just everyday scenes of life, but there's two wives. And like, what is that like? And what are the tensions there? And how does this feel? It feels a little eerie, right? It's playing off of that kind of the horror unsettledness that you're supposed to feel, and then it gets much worse. But it also deals with the struggles with polygamy, right? The first wife is having doubts about whether polygamy is even a good thing at all. She's reading the anti-polygamy newspaper. And the second wife, who's more bought into it, is still feeling hurt that she's not the first wife. She's not the one he really loves, right? So it's interesting in that it like can get into some of those nuances that you're not going to get from either the faith-promoting film or the anti-Mormon horror film.
That is a really good point. It is a film involving polygamy, but it is not a film about polygamy. And maybe that's why this has been such a hard genre to address. Because like you said, you have the kind of flat villain, or you have a very sanitized church films that are, for good reason, are not really going into the quandaries proposed by polygamy. And this does, but not in a way to defend or attack it, but just accepting it as a fact, because it was a fact for early Latter-day Saints.
And that, I think, is the strength and the power of it, that it's just there. And I think even for the three of us who come from the Latter-day Saint tradition, for whom, like I wouldn't be here if there weren't polygamy. You too, Liz, I think?
Yes, definitely.
Maybe less a part of your family history, Meagan, since you're a convert, but it still felt unsettling for me, even somebody who is on some level grateful for polygamy because of his very existence, to help make it feel weird and unsettling, and that's before the water starts shaking and the angel shows up and everything goes to crazy real fast.
It's almost like they were like, oh, you think polygamy is weird? Watch this. We're going to make it really weird.
Let's make Mormonism weird again, right?
That's right.
We can do a lot more than that. And I love how they incorporate this very esoteric stuff we have about how you tell a good messenger from a bad messenger, right? And that's central to the film. And they do it in a way that, like, if you already know about it, yeah, that comes off. But if you didn't know about it, they're able to subtly introduce it in ways that help you understand if you don't know about the messenger's hand and what that means. They get it across without doing any clunky exposition dialogue of as you know.
So I'm interested in that because that was one thing where I thought, you know what, this is such a critical point. I do wish that there had been more exposition about that. But what did you see that made you feel like a non-LDS audience would get that?
I think they do a really masterful job, actually, of doing this show don't tell, because we have, in the opening sequence, we have this emphasis on hand holding, right? It opens with the husband holding hands with the two wives, and then we see them holding hands at the dinner table to say their prayer. So we get this like, oh, hand holding is going to be thematically important, and we're using the language of cinema to tell us that. And then we have the scene where the second wife is reading the section in the Doctrine and Covenants about how to tell this angel from that angel. And then the camera shifts up to a picture of Joseph Smith with an angel on their wall. And then the first wife comes in and you see her reflection in the picture. And so it's like telling you without any words, okay, this is going to be important. Here's an angelic messenger, and here's the first wife coming in. That's what she's seen, because we haven't seen the angel yet. But this is implying this is what she thinks she's seen. And there's some doubt because we've been reading this thing about how to tell one messenger from another. And it sits there long enough that you can read the words. But it does require, it's not Hollywoodized, right? So it does require some to focus and think and interpret the symbols, but I think there is enough there that you can do it. And I love that they're trusting their audience that way.
I do wonder how many people paused that to read it, because it doesn't linger on it long enough that you could read the whole thing while it's on screen. You would have to pause it.
No, I think you can just read the heading mostly.
And I have subtitles on my TV all the time. And the subtitle actually, even though there's no audible dialogue, the subtitle says the means by which you can tell a false messenger from a true, whatever the subheading is in that section of the Doctrine and Covenants. So they tried to, even in the subtitles, get that point across, like, it's not just wind blowing through the canyon, it's this section of the Doctrine and Covenants is important.
I did see the Doctrine and Covenants chapter in there and the picture, but the hand-holding between everybody, I actually didn't pick up on that. And that's really cool because I'm going to go rewatch it and look at that.
Yeah, watching it through a second time is really interesting when you know where it's going. There's so much intentionality about everything that's in there. So, I do have a question, though. We've praised this film a lot. We've said it's really interesting. It's a good turn for LDS cinema. What do we make of the horror, though, in this film? Because I know if you were shocked by, say, Brigham City or States of Grace, this one has a lot more gore than you're used to seeing in LDS cinema, right? So what purpose does not only the anxiety and the psychological horror, but the actual blood on screen serve here? Why make this as a horror film?
I'm going to let Megan take that because I watch enough horror films that the blood didn't bother me as much anymore. And maybe that says something about my taste these days, but
I think it's just the contrast between we're used to seeing LDS films, especially historical set films, being very clean. And this one is not.
Well, you bring up Brigham City. Even Brigham City, the serial killer running around, like, you don't see a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just part of the horror genre, though, which is why I was like, okay, they're stabbing him now. Although there's that interesting side note where she's like, it doesn't say we have to kill him. We just have to spill his blood on the ground. And then I saw one of the comments on YouTube. It's like, so why'd you stab him inside? Just stab him outside. There's no ground. Anyway, that was funny.
Is a very telling moment as well, too, when she kind of she decides to go all the way with it. For me, the gore actually didn't add very much, and I think maybe I'm prudish about gore in general. I like thrillers and even horror films sometimes. My husband loves horror. But gore, I think for me, it's jarring. It actually removes me from the story. I was just really thinking this movie through. Maybe more than I intended. I probably overthought it. But I was really just seeing there was so much going on. I was absorbing so much. And then that took me out of it for a minute. And to be honest, I feel like when there's these really bloody scenes in movies, some of the tension is lost, actually. It's relieving some of the tension, in a sense. It's like the blood is being spilled. And so now the angst around the horrible deed that's going to happen is being finalized before your eyes. Whereas I think if some of that was more implied, it actually would have preserved more of the tension. So that's I love the film. That's my only complaint, so...
It's interestingly done because it is done very slow and methodical, and because the husband is drugged, he doesn't fight a lot. It's very strange and almost surreal feeling. It doesn't feel like it's really happening somewhat. And I don't know how much of that is intentional and how much of that is short film, low budget things, but
It reminded me a little bit of a scene in... It's not a horror, maybe, it's hard to classify. A Promising Young Woman, where at the end, she goes to exact revenge on the people who were responsible for her good friend in medical school killing herself. And she ends up getting smothered by this guy, but they dwell on how long it takes to smother someone, which is a long time, which is part of the point. It's like this guy chose to enact this point of violence. This isn't just, oh, there was a gunshot, people are dead. It's nope, he took the time and made the decision to do this. And I think dwelling on that in that same dynamic in this movie also sets that up. But I would be curious to get, especially since the two of you are women and mothers, the juxtaposition of the blood when they stab their husband and then end up murdering him. It's not clear to me that was what they were intending at the beginning, but that's where they end up. And then the blood at the end of the movie, when she has her miscarriage, like that is also part of one of the rolling themes in this horror short.
And I think that's the reason to have the blood, is because if you didn't show the blood on screen, how are you going to show the miscarriage, right? And like that visceral moment of the miscarriage is the moment of horror, right? In some ways, the killing of the husband is not the climax of the horror. It's when they realize that killing the husband was the wrong thing, right? When like they were led astray and they realize, oh my gosh, what did we do? And it was for nothing, or worse than nothing. It was for the wrong reasons. And you need the blood in the first scene to be able to show the miscarriage in the second scene.
That's a good point too, Carl. I like that you make about showing the deliverance, how that's not a crime of passion whatsoever. That's pretty clearly shown in that scene.
I wish at the end they had switched over to the first wife's reaction when she has her miscarriage, because there's this really subtle moment, and I think even non-Latter-day Saints who didn't take the time to pause and read the section of the Doctrine and Covenants would figure out that she's reaching out for the angel, but the first wife is, no, we're not going to do that because I want this to happen, right? I want out, and this messenger's given me my justification for getting out of this relationship that I do not want anyway.
That's the biggest punch for me in this film. I love that because a lot of shows and series that have been done about us have focused on religious violence and how it's endemic to our tradition as Latter-day Saints. And it changes that a lot by suggesting that personal motivations that are common to everybody, things that I think anyone could relate to, seeing this woman in a plural marriage, that this religious violence wasn't really religiously motivated. That religion was more the vehicle for it to happen. And that scene where she swipes the hand away, that's the scene that says she is choosing this, not God. I thought that was so refreshing because it's just making room, really, for violence in religion to be a lot more complicated than most of how we see it depicted.
Point of order, though, they depict it as endemic in our religion. It isn't actually endemic in our religion.
Right.
And I gotta say, when I watched American Primeval, I was like 5 minutes into the Mountain Meadows Massacre scene before I was like, oh, wait, this is the Mountain Meadows Massacre, because I know what actually happened historically, and that is not what happened historically.
Yeah, I definitely think we talked about this when we did Under the Banner of Heaven, right? That there's this desire to portray religious violence as coming from religion and from doctrine, instead of showing there's a wide variety of people. Not everyone who's in a religion becomes violent. So what is the actual tie here? It's the personal motivations, the struggles, and would that have happened regardless of what community they're in? I don't know. It's more difficult to draw a cause-effect line if you acknowledge that different people interpret things differently. And we make use of the philosophical and theological tools that we have. Yes, everyone does, to justify themselves. But that doesn't mean that those tools necessarily are to blame.
I like how you worded that they used that theology, and it doesn't have to be a theology. It can be an ideology that became the justification for what really existed prior. And I just love that in this film, anti-polygamy person is the bad guy.
Right?
That doesn't usually happen. Of course, the woman who's mostly pro-polygamy, she jumps in on it too. But I was like, that's kind of refreshing.
Certainly turning things around. So shall we quickly do some ratings, and then we'll bring on Barrett and Jessica. So we do 3 different ratings for everything on this show. Our first rating is for content. We've already talked about that. This is a horror film. It is full of lots of tension. There is blood. It's no slasher flick in terms of blood, but that's definitely something people should know about. Thoughts on a specific rating? I don't know.
I'll give it Telestial.
Telestial?
I'd give it Telestial. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I think I would say terrestrial. Yeah, like you said, it's not Saw. Lower terrestrial kingdom.
Okay, for artistic merit, we give a rating for skillful and effective use of craft, 1 to 5 popcorn balls.
All the popcorn balls.
I agree. It's really fun. You have to take it in terms of what it is. It is a short film. They tend to be a little slower paced. It's more in the artistic cinema genre than it is in like the Hollywood genre. So if you go in expecting Hollywood pacing, that's going to be difficult for you. But I just really love this. It's great for what it is. So I'd give it 5 popcorn balls as well.
I think good horror pacing, though.
Yeah, dread.
That's right. Yes, absolutely.
Dread and anxiety. And I love the music, too. I was noticing that on my rewatch today. Just the creepy chanting and all of the environmental noise. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, the environmental noise was just constantly ratcheting up your sense of eeriness. Yeah.
I'm so excited to go camping in southern Utah next week.
Ah, yes. Okay, and our final rating is for gospel connections and morally edifying messages. We do 1 to 5 apricots. This is a really interesting film for this, because especially I love the point you brought up, Meagan, talking about how do we use our beliefs to justify what we already want to do, as opposed to allowing them to change us and what we want to do. It's a really nuanced and difficult conversation that this film facilitates.
Yeah, that's a more succinct way of putting it, and I like that. And for me, I think I would maybe put a 3, because it's definitely not trying to be didactic, and I don't even think it's trying to be morally edifying. I think it's just trying to discuss heavily inflected moral issues in a way that creates space for more complexity than other depictions of religious violence around Latter-day Saints has allowed for. So I think it accomplishes something worthy, and there's some really great moral considerations in the film, but I find it edifying, but I don't think it's striving for that. So that's why I say 3. Not because I think that there's some immoral things weighing it down or anything. I just think it's just trying to be firstly an entertaining horror film.
I think I'd give it 2, actually, because I could think of the one gospel connection is, if an angel shows up, you better shake that guy's hand. It's first if he's telling you to murder somebody. Like, if God tells you to sacrifice your kid, Abraham, you better be dang sure that it's Yahweh talking to you and not somebody else, right? Little bits of religious violence that exist even in the scriptures. And that is an explicit gospel connection, but it's not a redemptive one, which is why I'm going to give it 2 popcorn balls instead of my 5, because I won't give it 5 unless it has an explicit gospel connection. This one does, but it's the wrong sort of gospel connection.
I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to probably give it a 4, because I think this is just a nature of horror. The point of horror is to make us feel uncomfortable, and by that contrast, have these good conversations that are difficult to bring up in a film that keeps us in that comfortable space. So even though the content is dark and difficult, I feel like the gospel connection there is a little bit bigger than you guys think. That's my take. So we'll average it out.
Yeah. So we average it out, and then it ends up being mine. So
That's
perfect.
I win.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, and for our second half of the podcast, we are welcoming Barrett and Jessica on to talk to us. Can you guys give yourselves a little introduction?
Yeah, I'm Jessica Burgin, a co-director of the film The Angel. I typically produce films and video work, but this was my first time directing something, which is great because I got to co-direct it with Barrett, who is my favorite director to work with. So it was really fun for us to get to work together in that capacity.
And I'm Barrett, and also co-director on The Angel. Together, we own a production company called Burgundy Pictures. As Jessica mentioned, we've always worked together on our films, and we've jumped in and out of different capacities in media. So between working for ourselves and doing narrative stuff, and then also commercials and music videos and corporate media, and we've been doing that for about 10 years together. Actually, longer than that. We did it in high school together.
That's
also
true.
as teenagers.
Knew each other great.
So yeah, but professionally for 10 years.
I love that. So we were just going to shoot a couple questions at you and talk about the movie a little bit. One of the things that we talked about was how much of a departure this is from what people are probably used to for LDS cinema, right? And we've had Barrett on before to talk about how you feel about horror as a religious genre of film. But tell us again, like, why do a horror film that has LDS elements for a mainstream audience, right? You film this to try to reach a more mainstream audience than a lot of LDS cinema does. So why do that with horror?
Yeah, I think I'll speak to that on a personal level as far as who we are as artists and creators, because I think for us, our faith, our backgrounds, our beliefs, and who we are inseparable from the work that we create. And so horror is a very popular genre. We've had some experience with films, but we're still growing in our careers. And horror is a very good entry-level genre, especially because you typically have a pretty built-in audience. I guess that's the reason for doing a film in that vein, but we felt being able to incorporate some things from our experience as Latter-day Saints, or even not our experience, but like historical elements would be a really interesting way to approach that genre to make it specific to something that we're familiar with.
Yeah, and then of course you guys may have talked about this already, but and I have felt this way for some time, and I feel like it's demonstrable that Latter-day Saint belief and doctrine and like larger Mormon culture is very intriguing and fascinating to a mainstream audience. So I almost feel like, Liz, like there's 2 questions in there, because we've got why engage with the faith tradition aspect. And to Jessica's point, both horror and Mormonism at large, I guess, are very marketable and interesting to people. And then, of course, we're qualified to tell Latter-day Saint stories. I think there is a level of qualification that is maintained when one continues to participate within a culture, especially a minority culture. And as far as like horror goes, from a more personal place, from a spiritually rooted place, I have just always found it like almost baffling maybe any like aversion to these kinds of stories from a Latter-day Saint space. I get it in terms of late 20th and 21st century, like kind of cultural aversion to it.
It's also what we're familiar with.
Yeah, and what we're familiar with.
Like Liz said.
That's right, like what's been done. But within the larger history, the very first miracle of the church was casting the devil out of Newell Knight. And like all of the emphasis that Joseph Smith put on diverse spirits and detecting spirits and like being really careful not to be deceived. And you've got the New Testament, which is Christ is casting out evil spirits. And this is like a massive part of the theology.
Not just like one, like a legion.
A legion.
Like,
yeah, that's right. This aspect is present in the temple. And it's always interesting to me that, you know, to what extent does our discomfort maybe kind of move past the head, like kind of hedge up the way in the face of what the actual doctrine is, what the actual religion is, whether we're uncomfortable with it or not. And maybe even more to that point, I feel that fairy tales and the Old Testament, these are really brutal, complicated, important scriptures and texts. And when the Old Testament comes around to study as Latter-day Saints, the reticence to it and the reluctance around it reminds me exactly why I fear that we've gotten away from being able to understand the utility of a tragedy and a scary story or a fable or a myth that challenges us. And so that's kind of why we wanted to go headlong into that sort of story by kind of mirroring that type of story formula, if you will.
I just love your thought there of reading the Old Testament as a horror movie. Having just read Joshua this week, right? The Israelites are the horror monster. They're just going to come and wreck you all no matter what.
Yeah.
It's going to totally change the way I view that, but in 4 years, because we read it last week.
And I do want to say one more thing to that point. I don't want to speak for you, Jessica, but I think we both kind of feel this way. And we made the movie 2 years ago, but in the context of the world we live in today, I think it does us a disservice. Like when we can't conceive of terrible things happening, we necessarily are complicit in upholding those things because we don't want to know. We don't want to think about how bad things could be and evil's counting on that. And so when I look at the world around me and some of the horrific, really horrible stuff, that just reminds me of how true the Book of Mormon is and how real the Lord is and how much we need his mercy and his grace and the empowering aspects of the atonement. I feel more bold about, yeah, we're going to tell some scary stories, not exclusively. That's not the only genre we want. But within the Latter-day Saint context, the more pushback there is, the more necessary I feel it is because it's, I don't know, guys, look what's happening.
I think you're making a really good point here. I read this really interesting essay on Substack this week called Maybe Christian Art Shouldn't Be Clean. And it's making this same point that if the only place we see violence is this very clean violence in a Marvel movie or The Bourne Identity, where it's action and it's fun and it's exciting, we draw the wrong spiritual conclusions about what violence is. And so we need to balance that out with things that show horrific violence, right? Like Holocaust films like Schindler's List, or even something like The Hunger Games, where it's like, no, you should not be cheering for people killing each other. Aren't you sad about that? And so in many ways, the violence in the angel is a way of saying this can happen to you as religious people, and we should take that seriously and worry about the consequences that can happen from that. But do it in a way that's not saying, oh, all religion is bad. We should get rid of religion in order to get rid of religious violence. It's a more subtle way of saying, acknowledging that religion and violence can come together, and we need to look at that carefully and be aware of that and be exposed to that.
That was important for me because this, as we talked about earlier, this is the theme du jour around Latter-day Saints is religious violence. And one of the things that I really liked about this film pushing back on the idea that violence was simply endemic, where you see this character very deliberately choose to embrace violence because it suited her needs and her desires. I thought that was such a helpful message, not just because it's pushing back on the idea that there's something inherently violent about Latter-day Saint belief or theology, but because it is so easy for anyone of any persuasion, of any ideology, to use those things as a vehicle for sating those personal desires and motives for violence. To me, that's a much more complex, and it just leaves room for more discussion about what actually goes into somebody perpetrating something like this, because there are multiple layers, and you can see that in the film.
That's really well put, Megan.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Here.
It's been interesting for us to get different reactions to the film because, to your point precisely, the violence is perpetrated against the Latter-day Saint character, and they're all Latter-day Saint, but on the basis of, I think this new belief I have is going to trump the conventional ideology that we have inherited. And it has been fascinating how that really stress tests people and how they want to view or interpret the film. First of all, we've gotten plenty of comments that are like, yeah, like get in, where it's like, oh, so you're cheering on the violence against another character. To what extent is this a consistent ideology?
Well, I think what's so fascinating about that too is sometimes just forgetting that literally there's a murder that occurs.
It's a murder. It's a murder of another human.
Taking someone's life is a really big deal.
Yes, and
so it's been interesting to receive varied responses.
And it's interesting that the wife brings up, why don't we just go get a divorce? Which is like totally available to you.
very possible at the time.
Utah divorce laws were very liberal. Like you could have gone and gotten a divorce and yet you choose murder. So yeah, I'm very interested in the reactions that you've gotten from both LDS and mainstream audiences. Do you find that they differ at all?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Generally positive. I will say on the basis of actually, depending on someone's background, it does really inform how they feel about the ethical dilemma. And one of the first screenings we did, there was somebody who had reviewed it who was like frustrated. What does this potentially bad supernatural demon even want? He wants to disrupt a polygamous family. What's, I guess that means it's good. And did you forget that he caused someone to kill someone else? On the totem pole of ethics, it's like, Mormons and polygamy. And it's, yeah, I guess they killed him. And it's like, isn't that
I can say this. What about murder?
isn't that like, let's assume he's a bad angel.
10 Commandments? Don't murder people?
I'm sure I read somewhere that some guy's big thing was like, hey, if you could just kill that other person, like that's what I want you to do.
Early scriptural history.
Yeah, but Jessica, you may have thoughts on this. My takeaway has been one where I've been very humbled and honored that it has largely been extremely well received. Latter-day Saints like it because they feel it's very authentic and very accurate, which is funny given that it's a 19th century polygamy movie in the face of these other things that are supposed to be more contemporary. It's like, even there, I suppose they're recognizing the authenticity of who's qualified to tell these stories. And then non-members really like it, like people who have no association with the church.
Horror lovers.
Yeah, horror lovers especially.
And mythology, folk tales.
They're like amazing. And then the really ardent ex-Mormon crowd loves it. They're just like, thank you so much. It's honest. The two groups that we get the most pushback from are the sort of post-Mormon, maybe not totally out of the church, but kind of struggling. And that's fascinating and complicated, that they're uncomfortable with what they are worried that the film might be implying. The film implies a lot of things, and that's on purpose. And then the Catholic Protestant crowd detest it. And
We really, really are not a fan of the idea that we are approaching it from a Latter-day Saint worldview, which validates that experience. I think it feels entirely heretical.
yeah, the concern was that it legitimizes a Mormon cosmology.
Yeah.
And in any world where within the world it's a Latter-day Saint cosmology, they're like, this is ridiculous.
That's so interesting to me. When you're talking about it being like a litmus test, it's taking place in like the furthest flung corner of American religious history. And it's in southern Utah, so it's like barren red rocks. It's almost like you're on a different planet, and you feel very removed from modern cultural moorings. And it just feels like it was an invitation for people to consider this without reference to all of the modern discussion about this. It's like putting you in a place where you have to decide from first principles. What's motivating these people, and why or why not do I think it's right or wrong? And so for people to like just automatically be having knee-jerk reactions about it has to do with polygamy, or I just think that was a missed opportunity for them, because the remoteness of it from your everyday experience gives you a new forum, right, for exploring how violence happens. And I don't know, that's interesting to hear people. I think that was an invitation, and hopefully people can see that, hey, this is an opportunity to maybe not think about, bring all of your prejudice into it and just be in this alien world with this alien thing that's happening and consider how it might have felt.
Yeah, that's honestly, it's really to hear you say some of that, because that was very intentional, that we wanted it to feel like you were transported right into a moment in time, and that there wasn't a lot of exposition or like context. It's just like, we're just going to present this as a reality for this story.
And it's why we spent so much time on the polygamy, like a whole minute of it, it's just to acclimate the audience. I failed to mention there was a small group of Latter-day Saints who just hate it, but they can't specify why.
Who also wouldn't tolerate any horror film
or polygamy on screen or whatever. Yeah. And we get it. We understand. It's right on the edge of the sort of cultural boundary, but most of the time they're like, I don't have any real reason. I just don't think you should have made it. It's okay. Did we need this? That's the question. But to Megan's point about taking the time with it, one difference is that Latter-day Saints, more than anybody, have felt like it's slow paced, and non-members have said it's so fast paced. It moves so quick. And it's because they are taking in so much information that's new. And so we have to slow down and make sure that it's okay, because for us, it's like, oh, it's DSC 129. And then they're like, okay, you're not meant to read it, but it's there. If you want to go back, and on YouTube, they pause and like in the comments, like, no, wait, guys, no, if you go to this thing, there's this Bible thing that talks about the angel rules, and they're like telling each other.
It's so fun for us, recognizing those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, we thought a lot about the opening montage sequence and whether it was too lengthy and if we needed to make it shorter. But yeah, I do think it helped establish where we are, and that it's clear that this isn't like a sister. This isn't like siblings. This is clearly a plural marriage.
Yeah, like
one
his
man and two women who are married to the same man.
We watch it for a long time, and only at the end of the montage, there were a few screens we did where you can hear people like, this polygamy. And they're like processing it, and then as if it's like to make sure we do that like really uncomfortable kiss shot in the same shot. And the reason
one take that is
the reason for the single take.
This is unusual. We know what we're trying to put you in the scene.
That's right. The cinematic language is meant to make it feel like cohesive in one. So it's, no, we're not going to cut. We know you want us to cut. We want to cut. It's to create a separation. It's, nope, it's one thing, and now we can start the story. And so that's kind of why.
I find it fascinating that the two groups who seem to have pushed back are people on the edge of Mormonism who maybe arguably don't want to take our cosmology seriously, or are on their way out of believing the cosmology. So however you'd want to phrase that. And then Protestants and Catholics, you said, who don't want to take the cosmology seriously either. I'm sure they'd be happy to watch, I don't know, the Alien movies, which is cosmic horror. That's not a cosmology you agree with either, right? But it's interesting that the sort of the one remaining religious tradition that you can just make fun of and nobody will get after you for it is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that apparently has shown up in the audience reaction. That's so deeply fascinating. I'm also fascinated by your comment that Latter-day Saints think it's too slow and everybody else thinks it's too fast because of the info dump. That hadn't even occurred to me, because I look at this section 129 and I'm like, nope, I know exactly what it says. I don't need to move on. But as you talk about the YouTube comments, there are people who pause it and read it.
Or who didn't even know that it was polygamy. That's really fascinating. Because all of us, as soon as we see that, we're like, oh, it's polygamy.
Yep. Yeah, right. Yep. Cultural marker check. Box achieved.
Yeah, I've had this same reaction. I recently have been starting to get people emailing me about my work about Brandon Sanderson and Mormonism and his work. And it was really interesting to hear this podcast talking about my work and say, oh, she makes the argument that Brandon Sanderson's books get you familiar with the Mormon worldview, but she thinks that's a good thing. And I'm like, isn't it a good thing? Know what other people's worldview? It's not that he's trying to convert you. It's just understand someone who's different from you. And so many people feel like that is a dangerous step to take with Latter-day Saints, to try to understand them on their own terms. Crazy. How could we possibly?
We have a lot of experience with that because we made the film in Utah. We lived out there for several years. Barrett went to BYU, but we actually are from Tennessee. So we grew up around a lot of people from very different faith backgrounds. So it's certainly not insulting to us. It's not scary when people have different reactions to it, but it is interesting.
And to Carl's point, I actually don't think it has anything to do with the cosmology. I think if you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's model of the elephant and the rider, that's just the BS. That the elephant, in my opinion, it's an identity politics issue. And so it's an extension of the larger fear of Mormonism being legitimized in any capacity. And so then this is silly because of this and this, and they don't even want to start it because it's like that would imply that we can take it seriously. And some of the comments we've gotten seem almost irritated that they feel that the film has high production value, which is really complimentary. It's like, hey, thank you. They're just like, it might look like a movie, but if you really know what the Mormons think, and you're not even, you're not even interested. Really, the craziest screening we did, which was my favorite because I just love all the tension. But we showed it at Ralston College. It's a private college in Savannah, Georgia. That's a return to the Western tradition. Our brother-in-law went to the college, and he was an associate producer on the film, so he brought it there to show it. There's all these graduates and then like returning alumni. And this with sort of the emphasis on the Western canon and whatnot. It's a private college that has a lot of kind of conservative Christian attendees, as well as maybe some sort of secular philosophy attendees. And people were like, yeah, we need to get back to the Greek and the Greek roots that we don't read anymore.
Audience.
This is the audience. And our brother-in-law like gravely underestimated how this film would read, especially it's really dark. We didn't say anything about that.
We had some walkouts.
Yes, the walkouts were Latter-day Saints. So the two Latter-day Saints who were there stormed out of the room during the ritual, just no. And then and of course, I know they had no idea we were coming, these poor girls. And then the room erupted in rage after, and Jake went up to answer questions about horror and Greek tragedy and like, where's horror functional in storytelling? And the first question was like, do you seriously believe that polygamy came from God? And Jake's, whoa, what? And it turned into this thing. And then the secular students were like, what is happening? They're like, we really like that movie. What is this weird?
Knowing that their Latter-day Saint alum walked out, they're like, I'm curious how other members of your faith feel about the film. Trying to read the room and figure out what's going on.
So this argument about polygamy broke out. We weren't allowed to say anything because it was like Jake's presentation. So I was like sitting there ready to argue. Finally, we were allowed to talk. And I called them because they took off their philosophy hats and put on Pastor John hats. And I thought this was dialogue. Like, what happened to the dialectic of... And they're all like, whoa. And then there was a girl there who was also attending who's a polygamy denier, but from our faith. So she raised her hand. It was like, actually, there's new journals, there's new information. And it's not. And so then it became this infighting, like, but we know our stuff. And she's dropping Michelle Stone like she thinks it's a name drop. And we're like, actually, no, we know a lot about the history.
Since someone asked a simple question who didn't have any context, and they were just like, so is it standard for like the practice to have two wives, to have two women in a family like this? And this girl answers and she's, no, you can have infinite wives. You can just have infinite wives. And we're like, whoa.
And Jessica's sister has her head down in shame. It was like, anyways, what's happening? And you can see why the Latter-day Saints left the room. So they left, the other members left on the basis of sacrilege. And then the other ones were mad on the basis of heresy. And I guess we managed to offend everyone. And yeah, that was the craziest training we've ever had. It was a good time. It was a really good time.
That sounds wild. I wish I could have been there. I could have been sitting there with my bag of popcorn. Just, yes, this is awesome.
Yes.
We got the polygamy denier, the evangelicals, the Latter-day Saints walking out, and then the secular philosophers who are like, what is happening? I'm really curious, something you just said there at the end, Barrett, that they thought it was, and now I'm reading the term you used, they thought it was blasphemous and
But
sacrilegious.
Sacrilegious.
That was the term.
yes.
I'm curious what part of it they thought was sacrilegious, because is this the same thing that happened when Richard Dutcher used confirmation circles in one of the God's Army movies, right? The one brother's getting confirmed while the other brother is getting gunned down by the gang, and he's juxtaposing visually these two moments, and people are like, you can't show Latter-day Saint stuff. I thought that was a pretty silly objection at the time, and I'm curious if the same sort of vibe is why they think yours is sacrilegious as well.
And I also just, to that same question, what's interesting is you've said a couple of times people are upset about it legitimizing polygamy, but that's interesting to me because it doesn't seem to be legitimizing it at all. It just, kind of like you said, it's just presenting it as a fact. I guess the reason why I wonder about that is because what I think maybe it's doing is just making it less taboo to talk about, and maybe people feel uncomfortable with that, like they want it to be a taboo, but I can't see where you could get that it's justifying polygamy.
We certainly wanted it to be more about inviting discussion and inviting questions than us necessarily feeding, this is exactly what we want you to think or believe or feel about it. Or, this is what we think and it's what we want to share. It was more, yes, let's open conversations for it. To Carl's question, though, about on what basis were Latter-day Saints feeling it was sacrilegious, one thing I do know, based on that screening in particular, is that I think during the moment when there's this ritual taking place in the film, I think they felt nervous because they didn't know where else it was going to go. Yeah. And so they wanted to remove themselves before seeing what was going to happen. And I can understand that. I think sometimes if you aren't sure what it is you're going to see, and with Latter-day Saints, we also sometimes will have specific standards about what we do or don't want to consume in terms of media.
It was endearing. It was
like we understand.
And I don't mean that condescendingly. It's yes, you should flee.
Yeah. But then of course there's this part of us that's just like, we're gonna have some catharsis and hopefully invite about what the themes are here.
I think part of it also is that we don't have the narrative model for what's going to happen next in that kind of situation. We are used to polygamy movies having either a very clear polygamy is bad message or a very clear, it was a test of faith and faith affirming. And this one's not doing either of those things. And it's just, as an audience member, you're just waiting for it to do one of those two moves. And it doesn't really do either of those. It's asking a completely different question. And that, I think, makes viewers feel uncomfortable because we're used to Hollywood plot beats where you can, it's going to be a down-ending second and an up-ending third, and how this plot beat is going to go.
Which is, I think, one of the reasons why I'm getting eternally mad at all these people who, don't want to affirm the cosmology or the polygamy or whatever else. I'm like, you guys, stop with your baggage to this. These three people and this otherworldly presence are all interacting with this thing that Latter-day Saints did. You don't have to believe it's true. You don't have to believe it's ordained of God. You don't have to believe this guy is trying to break up a polygamous marriage. He's just trying to get someone murdered. He's just trying to sow chaos. He's happy to use, all you have to believe is that these three people take this seriously, and this divine being is up to no good. You don't have to bring any other baggage to the table with that. And I find it fascinating that everybody is bringing their baggage to the table in ways that I don't think that happens with other traditions. If there was a Jewish horror film, people would not be like when The Godfather uses Catholicism to showcase how evil at the end of the first Godfather movie, where he's there acting as literally the godfather to this child. Do you renounce Satan and all of his works and all of his false promises while all these people are being gunned down at his orders? Nobody's like, oh, you're not taking Catholicism seriously, or I don't want to take Catholicism seriously.
Yes.
You guys, it's another tool. All you have to do is believe that these three people take it seriously. That's all. Stop bringing your baggage to the movies, you guys. You'll be a better movie consumer because of it.
But no, Carl, we wanted them to, though. I mean, it was exactly what we hoped for. Is that Meagan called it a litmus test, and it is, but it's also a bit of an Inkblot test. And it's meant to be. It's designed to be read that way. And what you just said, That's literally the direction we gave Doug Jones, is it was like, actually, you're more of the manifestation of an idea. She summoned you. She brought you into existence, which we already saw that because she's reading the anti-polygamy standard, and it interrogates and validates Mormonism at the same time. And it's meant to do that. It's meant to be read in all of those different ways. As far as what was sacrilegious, some people did not like the sort of stigmata element to it. If you're familiar with a stigmata, it's the Catholic idea that one sort of becomes Christ with the wounds. And the husband he's pierced in his hands and then his wrist and then his side. And
Was that deliberate? I didn't even pick up on that. And I have a PhD in Catholic theology. Okay, wow.
it's extremely deliberate.
Your movie's better than I even give it credit for.
Thank you. And to Megan's question, the movie's absolutely meant to be read, however, but the sort of almost enraged discomfort with it is that some people have questioned, and maybe rightfully so, in terms of what game we're playing, is it's, okay, if the angel says that polygamy is not of God, and the angel is not of God, then polygamy is of God. And that's the comment you guys are making, that at the very end, he doesn't show up, he doesn't keep his promise, and now they're left desolate, essentially, because the dude is dead and the miscarriage still happens.
To me, it's engaging with this general question we have to ask ourselves as Latter-day Saints, which is, what do we make of that? What do we believe about it? And it's not something that you can concretely look at any of the information and say, for sure, this is what it means, or for sure, that's what it means. It's making your own judgment.
But to Megan's point, too, the conflict arises necessarily from the polygamy. And it is just a matter of fact. It's the thing that happens, and you don't get the conflict without it. And to your point, we're not painting it in a very rosy light here. It's this complicated thing, but there has been some discussion of, is she really the husband's favorite? She's reading this and we actually had a shot where he's more aware of that than she realizes. And does the father run out to greet the son and kill the fatted calf? Does that mean he doesn't love the other son? There are some questions about the assumptions and the baggage we all bring to these stories, and that's the larger comment.
Another thing I'll share quickly that has been fascinating is there's been a few times we've had some people mapping or disagreeing with which wife is the first wife.
Oh, they argue with us.
Yeah, because some women have looked at it, and we intentionally, both of our actresses are beautiful women, but we did choose them so that one appeared more rugged, more used to this life, and one that appears to be a little more, about her appearance, a little more elegant, educated. The first wife character is Tatum Langton, who plays the protagonist that we see. So that's how we wrote her into the story. But the argument has been, but she's the more beautiful, the prettier one, and so she must be the second wife, because that's how it goes. If someone's going to marry someone else, then they're going to choose someone who kind of one-ups the other. And it's just fascinating, some of the, like Carl said, like baggage assumptions that have brought into
Well, one person argues. We're like, no, actually, she's cast as the first. This one's the first wife, and she's not. That's how we wrote it. That's how she's billed. She is the first wife. And like we probably could have given interpretation, but that's the first wife. Sorry.
Idea, the backstory we built about this family. We're like, no, she's the first wife.
We wrote it.
The other one is respecting her as if she has that authority in the family.
That's wild that they would argue with you over whether that's canonical or not. You're like, I'm the one who sets the canon. You can't argue with me.
And I can't wait to see, you guys are working on a feature length, right? So
Yeah. Yes, that's what is up next for you guys.
You're making a feature-length version of it?
We are,
Is Doug Jones going to be?
Yeah, and that's honestly largely credited to our producer, who's not on the call with us, but who is very invested in the short film and who will also be producing the feature film. But after working with our crew, he was like, any film that you produce, I will work on. And he's been excited to follow along. He's in so many great, amazing things. Yeah. And it was just like a huge honor for us to be able to work with him. But he's been kind enough to stay in contact with us. And yeah, we were very excited about that.
I'd be curious to know how you got him into this short film in the first place, because he's like a big deal in various, like Shape of Water, The Pale Man from Pan's Labyrinth.
It's a pretty wild story.
It's a very Latter-day Saint story.
Yeah.
The miracles can and do happen. So first of all, the feature is not the same story as the angel. It's just the same world. And he's coming back as the same character. He's the only character that's the same. And it's
Sort of anthological
yeah,
that way.
that's right. But what happened is I was at FilmQuest in Provo with our screenwriter, Daniel Yen Tu, and also Celine, our producer, Celine Anderson. And Doug was there that year as the guest of honor. So this was in October 2023. And I knew who Doug was, but I knew his work. It wasn't like a huge avid Doug Jones follower, but I did know who he was. And he came to one of these after parties that were just tons and tons of people. And he was mobbed with people. And you could see everyone pitching him. Hey, will you be my spider in my movie? Like, oh, yeah, very sweet. I'm like, just friendly. And I was standing across the room and Celine was next to me. And I had described wanting this angel character to be a Bill Skarsgård, like slender, and it was really important that he had sandy colored hair, like vital. And the reason it was vital that he had sandy colored hair is because Joseph Smith once taught whether an angel is a good or bad angel can be detected by his hair, particularly whether the hair is sandy colored. You can look that up in the Joseph Smith papers. And so Doug did have sandy colored hair and he walked in, and so Celine was like, hey, why don't you cast him as the angel? And I'm like, Doug Jones? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, I don't know. Like, Doug was like, he's mobbed by people. I don't know. I felt really nervous. And then she was like, the answer's already no if you don't ask. You may as well go ask him. So I was like, okay, that's a good idea. Everyone's asking him. And he's saying no to everybody. And so I start walking over to him to see if he wants to play the angel. That's what we're looking for. And the director of the festival walks up. He's buddies with me. He doesn't know anything about the project that we're doing because we were just there for the festival with the feature script. Yeah, but he knows Doug really well. And so he's, hey, a little pro tip. I don't know if you're going to talk to Dougie, but he's always wanted to play an angel. And I was like, what? What are you saying? Why are you talking to me? And he was like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that changes your story or what but we talked to him, this little secret advice. And I'm like, are you joking? And he walked away. So now I'm just like, thank you, Lord. So I walk over.
The newfound confidence.
With newfound confidence, I go off to Doug. And I'm like, hi, Doug. I loved you in the Guillermo del Toro movies, Boy and Pan's Labyrinth. And Doug is so charming and he's genteel. This is literally what he's like. He's like, oh, sweet boy. Like, oh, precious boy. You're too kind, you know? And he's kind of touchy, but like in a like good
like
way,
paternal.
you know, in a paternal grandfather.
Yeah.
So he's like, touches my, and he's like, oh, dear sweet boy, how kind.
He's so gentle.
And just touching my face, these long fingers. And I'm like, hey, doing this pioneer polygamy horror movie set in the late 1800s. And I think you'd be perfect to play the angel. Would you be interested in being an angel? And he was like, you're not going to believe this. He's like, I've always wanted to play an angel. And I'm like, whoa, okay, And so like, he was like, here, hold on. He gave me his manager's number. And I was like, whoa, did we get Doug
Which
Jones?
that's when you know someone's actually serious.
They get in the manager.
People exactly.
And then 2 other times during the festival, he made his big announcement. He's like, I found my new friends. He's standing next to Celine and put his arm on Celine. He's like, my new friends I'm going to be doing this movie with. And we're like, I think we got him. I think he's in. And sure enough, well, okay, one last little thing is yes.
Okay, I'm like, you got to mention
Yes. I was sitting behind him and I kind of like came to learn that he's this great non-denominational Christian guy. Because I don't know anything about his background. And I'm sitting behind him. I'm like, Doug, why have you always wanted to play an angel? And he turns around. He's like, oh, sweet boy. Thank you for asking. He's like, I believe there's 2 kinds of angels in life. Those that God sends from heaven above and those who bless your life through kindness. I'm like, oh, crap. Does he know like what we're kind of doing here with the movie?
Right. Because you pitched it as, do you want to play an angel? But you're actually playing a fallen or like a false angel.
Well, so that's what I told him later. I found him and I was like, I prayed about it. I was like, what am I going to do? I don't want to trick Doug Jones into playing this character. And so I said a little prayer and then I went and found him. I was like, Doug, I want to make sure there's no misunderstanding. I was like, there's actually 3 kinds of angels. And the third is the kind that is not one. He's like, I kind of got that from the pitch. As long as I get to wear the white robes. And so I was like, okay.
But also so talented with his physicality and is a
Yes.
contortionist. And so a lot of the characters he's played are like heavily costumed with prosthetics and makeup work. It was really cool for us to be able to give him something that he could show his face, like, seeing him.
Yeah, and that shot is just so
Yeah, him looking at breaking the fourth. Well, he doesn't break.
Almost.
Close enough.
but breaking the fourth wall in a very, very LDS temple kind of way.
I mean, the film definitely has a statement to be made, and it's talking to you if you know it. So, yeah, he was great. He was awesome to work with too. Very friendly. Said such kind things about Latter-day Saints and about working with the crew. And like Jessica said, Celine just did such a phenomenal job producing it, and he had such a good time. Let me know when you're doing a feature. I'd love to come back and finish the character out.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. That's really awesome.
So fun.
Thank you.
One of the things we talked about before you joined, I just wanted to get your take on it. There is the moment where the one wife reaches for the angel's hand, and then the other wife is like, no, we're not doing that. I don't want you. And we talked about how just and we've mentioned this a little bit in our conversation with you also, just the idea of religious violence as something that religion is another tool for violent people to get their own ends. And I wanted to just pick your brains about that and how much of that was intentional and how much you wanted to incorporate that just as because that's something that isn't exclusive to the horror genre. But I thought you did a really good job of adding these different elements to that one particular character to the detriment of literally everybody else on the screen. Because they have the option of divorce, but the one wife is pretty clearly, no, let's murder him. And that's on her, and she uses religion because this thing manifests, whether she conjures it up or whether it's just there on its own to take advantage of the situation. It's pretty clearly her that is egging this whole situation on. And I just wanted to get a little bit more from you on what your intention with that character was, because I find her probably the most fascinating of all the four people who appear on the screen.
Right. That was a great question.
I think some of this is with her character exploring how when there's something we want or something that we want to be sure of, how far are we willing to go to be so sure of ourselves? Or just not want to consider alternatives because doing so would be admitting to something or having to take accountability. And I think that's the core exploration with her character in particular, because she's feeling and thinking and going down this one track in terms of her perspective on her situation and not wanting to consider that maybe the change could originate from herself. It's more that whatever's happening externally needs to satisfy the discontent or the ambiguity or the struggle that she's going through.
I think to your question, Carl, like she employs religion to persuade the other plural wife. And we're counting on the fact that people do associate religion and violence with each other. We know that. We know the audience feels that way. We know even Latter-day Saints have a complicated understanding of that. The very first story in the Book of Mormon with Nephi having to go into Jerusalem and slay Laban. And like the angel is telling him, kill this guy. It's not that far off from a sort of Abrahamic sacrifice or from this complicated relationship that we do have with, you just mentioned Joshua, and it's like, go slay everybody in the city. However, we're counting on the audience feeling that way to beg the question and create the ambiguity. I think from my perspective personally, I think that violence is as inherent to human behavior as religion is. and that everybody uses religion to justify violence, whether the religion is true or not. And by true, of course, like religiosity is to some extent just ideology. And that isn't why the second wife does what she does. She does what she does to try to save her child because her faith has been confused. She feels betrayed by this person who she thought was on the same page as her. And then finally, she's persuaded, maybe I'm not loved. Maybe I've made a huge mistake. And so her finally making a violent choice, like a deliberately impassioned violent choice, is more tied to a crisis of faith than tied to a sort of religious, this is what God wants from me. It is this breaking point that she finally makes a truly violent decision. And the angel directly quotes Brigham Young to them. He cites blood atonement to the two women about the smoke ascending to heaven.
Yeah. I wrote the whole Mormon article on blood atonement, so I know exactly. Yeah, when she said that, I was like, "Oh, yep, I know exactly where that is."
It's a direct lift. But what you also know about how blood atonement was understood, not unlike, kind of the understanding of a liturgy of penalties within our tradition, is that the idea is that this was this self-imposed thing in the steps of repentance as restitution. You cannot make restitution for killing somebody. The best you can do is offer your mortal probation as like, okay, this is what I can do to sort of access the restitution in order for the atonement to work. And for the angel to employ that in a sort of inverse, I want you to go and kill people. I think the line there is that's what she wants to do. And to some extent, the relationship between religion and violence, to me, depends on the order. In what order is the ideology coming from? Because if it's like, I don't want to do this thing, but I have to go to war. I have to go to war to save my family. Or I have to fight this villain to the death because he's coming for me. Versus, I think I really don't like you. And as it turns out, this angel said that I got to do this, so I guess I got to come for you. But then what is the religion and what is the violence is the question. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but in my opinion, they actually have nothing to do with each other in how the wife gets the other wife to do what she wants. She just uses it as a rhetorical device, and that's it.
No, that does answer my question. Just to get into what you viewed the motivations of that wife especially when she says, "No, I don't want you to reach out to this guy. We're just going to go do this thing," right? Like that to me was the key character moment for her. When she, like you were saying, Jessica, she doesn't want to confront whether this is a true angel or not. She just wants to do the thing to get out of this polygamous relationship. And I just find that very interesting and telling. And in the end, of course, damning.
Well, sometimes it's not enough. It's not enough to, especially if we're not at home with an idea, or if we kind of know it's not the right thing. It's not enough to just move on. I think we kind of know this. We've kind of seen this. She has to go back and kill it. She has to go back and be like, no, also not for you either, because this thing is so frustrating to me. And in fact, Jessica and I have, as we've talked to, maybe we're still in our secrets here, that the film is more of a comment on faith crisis or apostasy or leaving something than it has anything to do with polygamy. It's a Mormon film that's a metaphor for Mormonism a little bit. And to the extent, like, who ultimately gets harmed when you stake out on something that it's like, I'm certain, and it's okay, you better know for sure. And I think you can get away with that in horror film, because what could be more horrifying than the legitimacy of a Latter-day Saint cosmology?
We did talk about that a little bit, that it's so unusual that the anti-polygamy person is sort of the villain in the film, right? She's the one who does the most evil.
Yeah, she wouldn't say so. She feels like she's telling herself, like, I'm helping. I'm doing what I'm helping others, but, it's very convenient.
It's convenient.
Well, that's just so interesting. Again, I think Jessica brought this up like 30 minutes ago or whatever about the polygamous marriage might be condoned, but are totally okay with the fact that a murder happened on screen. It's you need to go check your moral calculus here. Which is so interesting, and maybe an indictment of our culture as a whole, that people dying and getting killed in murder is something that happens a lot in movies and things. Like, I think Megan's reaction to the horror was less than mine because I watch a lot more horror than Meagan does. And so that's just interesting. Again, I'd tell you to leave your baggage at the door, but it's actually not possible to. But, do your best, I guess.
But I appreciate, you're begging the question. You're begging the right question, which is like, how much are we mapping onto it? That's what's so great about a fable. Fables can be whatever you want them to be. And that's why I like Old Testament style storytelling sometimes, because it's so messy and it's like, does it mean this or does it mean that? And it's very useful.
And I'm just going to say, I'm so happy I could hear all of this background info from you guys. I could just talk about this forever. It's fascinating. I have sung your praises to as many people as I can. And I've encountered some people who have been resistant to it for reasons that I do understand.
Sure.
But I've tried to kind of get them to see what it is doing and what it is not trying to do. And again, I think bringing those expectations can sometimes set people up for the wrong thing, and then they're disappointed.
So where can people follow you guys so we can keep up with what you're doing? Because I know there's going to be lots of cool things coming out of you guys in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we do have a website. Burgundy is our production name. Burgundy, like indie films.
Yeah, Burgin, Burgin, D or die. So if you want us to die, Burgin die.
Burgins make indie films.
Yeah, burgundy.com.
Burgundy. We also are on Instagram and we'll regularly post updates there. We also, on our website, you can subscribe to a newsletter where periodically we'll share updates about projects.
Our Instagram and X handles are Burgundy Pictures on Instagram, Burgundy Pics on X, and then we're both individually on Instagram, Barrett Burgin, and then Jess_Burgin on Instagram.
Fantastic. Like, where can people find you, Meagan?
Mostly my articles on Deseret News. I don't have much of a presence where else these days.
But they're all fabulous articles, so you should definitely check them out.
Yes, and I always post them to my X account. So I am on X. My handle is Trey Claire. I was very young when I chose that handle, but it's TRESCLARE.
Okay, fantastic. Carl, where can people find you nowadays?
I'm still on Threads, but I'm not super active there. Maybe Facebook.
And you can follow my writing and book reviews at lizbusby.com. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with a friend who enjoys good movies and good conversation. You can also subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice or on YouTube. And we would love to hear your thoughts on this episode via email, social media, or on our website. It really makes our day to hear from you guys. This has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. We'll see you next time.